Hi everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay, perfect. So I was told that the pre-med club in for U Ottawa hosted this event, so whoever is
mm,
speaking first.
yeah, that's me. Hi. Hi everyone. I'm Aditi Rao and I'm with U Ottawa Pre-Med Society. We are a club whose goal is to provide resources to U Ottawa pre-med students to help them succeed with whatever career goals they have in medicine. That includes partnering with other organizations to provide prep seminars such as this, networking events, and other fun medicine-based activities. Our Instagram handle is at U Ottawa Premed, and I can put that in the chat. And with that, I will hand the mic over to our speaker today, who will be guiding us through a seminar about medical school interview preparations.
Okay, thank you. Let me just share my screen for the presentation and we can get started. I assume
Yep.
okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll just do a little bit of a housekeeping before we begin. So this event is co-hosted by Accepted Together as well, which I'm a consultant on. And this seminar will be recorded and I'll be presenting information and also advertising for my packages at the end. And if you have any questions about any of the presentation I introduced today or questions about the service I can provide, you can reach out to me at Accepted Together for any follow-up questions. I just want to give a little brief intro about myself before we begin. So, my name is Le. I'm a first year medical student at U of T. I did my undergrad at Western University in the medical sciences program. So, just give you a little bit of a brief introduction to my journey to medical school. So, as I mentioned, I did my undergrad at Western and I wrote my MCAT the summer after second year and I got the score of 523. And I applied in the beginning of my year three to four Ontario medical schools that accept third-year students. That's namely U of T, McMaster, Queen's University, and University of Ottawa. I was fortunate enough to receive interviews at three schools at U of T, Queen's, and McMaster. And then eventually I was accepted at U of T and Queen's, and I was waitlisted at McMaster by the time I accepted my offer at U of T. Okay, so in this presentation, I kind of want to go from introducing some general tips on how to prepare for interviews to more specific tailored tips to different type of interview questions you might see, as well as introducing you to different type of interview that you will see, especially for the Ontario schools. So I think the first big general tip I would give is to introspection. I think this is really important in every step of your application journey, whether it's writing your personal essays, building your ABS, and preparing for your interviews. You want to think about two or three strengths that you're very good at and how you can showcase this to the admission committee. What I mean by this is that you shouldn't just tell them that I am a very empathetic person, for instance, or I am very diligent, I'm a very resilient person. You should do this by show, not tell. Basically, you should use reflect upon your ABS experiences, your entries, and think about some of the stories and personal experiences that can highlight and illustrate the strength to them. And another thing you want to think about, which is very cliche but important regardless, is why do you want to be a doctor? Um, this question is less likely to be asked in a Canadian medical school interview, as opposed to like in the States, but it is a really good question to get you started regardless because they help you to kind of tone down um, couple very critical experience in your life journey and how would they contribute to you being a doctor. This could be like a childhood inspiration or talking to your mentors and being inspired by them, or it could be some of your personal experience that you felt that demonstrate some of your strength or weaknesses and that can shape how you decide to become a doctor. And the second point I want to touch on is think like someone you want to be, right? So, each schools there can be ChemMet or U of T. They have their specific four clusters that I attached here. If you are this is especially helpful if you're kind of stuck and you don't know where to begin and how to begin. You can take a look at the ChemMet's roles. You can take a look at the U of T four clusters. I kind of build your interview prep along those lines, right? So if you look at UFT's advocate and it says advocacy, community service, and social responsibility, and reflect upon your ABS entry and think about what are some experiences from those categories that I can potentially take and use as stories for interview and talk about them. And this is also a helpful way for you to kind of tone it down into two, three strengths or something you're really good at, and that you can really showcase your personality to the admission committee. And the third tip, it's kind of like people tell you all the time, is asking for help. Whether it could be friends, mentors, or consultants like us who have been through the process before, I find that it's really helpful that you can practice some interview questions with friends who may have also gotten interviews. This way, you kind of monitor each other and motivate each other to keep going instead of kind of slacking off. And in terms of consultants, I personally myself, I reach out to consultants for my interview prep, and I find that there's able to give you a little bit more professional advice and give you tips on where you're lacking and how to improve because they have seen so many students, they help work with so many students, and they can give you a lot more in-depth tips and they can see things from a different perspective. So that's really helpful. And the fourth one is to know your schools, whether this is the requirement or the values, like UFT's four clusters, or the interview type. How am I being assessed? What is the interview like? How long is it? How many questions? And what type of questions is gonna be on during in the interview? It's a good way to get started and get to know a little bit about while you're waiting for the interview or while you're preparing for the interview. And I think the last tip is really kind of hard to do, well, because while you're waiting for the interview or while you have received interview invite, there's a lot of inherent stress and anticipation with the results of the interview. And I think it's one way to make this process a little bit less stressful is to really try to think optimistically and try to enjoy the process. So one of the things I was told by a mentor is that um, you shouldn't be nervous about the interview invite or doing the interview because the med school has reviewed your application. They really like you as a person. They're just extending this interview invite to you so that you can so they can know a little bit more about you as a person and so they can know that they're making a right decision about offering you a place. So this is really them doing like a final check on you before they can extend your offer. So I find that little optimistic way of thinking about it really helpful, and it takes away a lot of the stress associated with competition with other people and really just focus on yourself. Okay, so in terms of the interview, you want to obviously practice with lots of people. And I find that, sometimes it's really helpful to practice with friends and family and good to have some regular structure practice with a person who have interview, like a consultant. But most of the time, you'll be practicing by yourself. And one way to do it is very helpful is to do a video record and time yourself. So if you guys have a MacBook or like a Apple laptop, what you can do is there's an app called Photo Booth that you can actually, instead of taking pictures, you can actually take videos as well. So what you can do is you can video record yourself on Photo Booth and you can just talk to your computer, since a lot of the interviews will be asynchronous virtual. So it's good to get comfortable with speaking to a computer, speaking to a blank screen. So you will do this and you will time yourself, and then you can stop the recording and like look back at the video again to see if there's anything that you can improve on, not just your answer, but also how you deliver your answer. Are you taking a lot pauses? Are you stuttering a little bit? Are you speaking too fast? Or are you using a lot of these fillers words like uh, um, so these things can really interfere with your delivery if they're to a very extensive state. So watching back the recording is really helpful for you to recognize these and watch it from the perspective of someone who will be, marking your interview. And I think one thing is when you're practicing, especially if you're doing like a mock interview, like a timed interview, it's really important to practice and dress as if you're doing the actual interview. So wear your formal blouses, your suits, sit in an environment that's quiet and that you would actually do an interview in. This way, you are getting adapted to the environment that you will eventually do the interview at. So this eliminates a lot of the environmental stressors that may be present on the day of your interview if you're just moving to a new room and getting used to your attires. So this helps you to eliminate all these factors so you can focus more on the interview itself. Okay, so now I want to go into a little bit of introducing different type of questions you can anticipate on the interview day. So the first one I want to start with is personal questions. So these questions are, I think, the easiest to prepare and be ready for because you can literally look through your ABS and pick and choose some stories and experiences that you can talk about during your interview. So I had this table here that I personally used when I was preparing for my interview. So I had like a big Excel sheet, and then in each column I have something different, and I just kind of build on to the columns. So this is a good way to keep your thoughts and stories organized, and you can so this way it makes the practice a little bit easier. So in column one, I'm just giving a hypothetical example here. So you can talk about your experience. So for instance, if I were to be a volunteer at the hospital, so I would talk about this experience, obviously a little bit elaborative. So I was a volunteer at the hospital for over 3 years and I work on blah 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 blah. So this is introducing the experience to me. The lesson is the takeaway and the lessons you recognize from this experience. So the important thing about medical school interview is not only talk about what you did, but also talk about your reflections and what you learned from this experience, because self-reflection and continuous improvement and learning is very important for being a physician. So that's something that the medical school will want to look at when you are doing your interview. So, for instance, the lesson learned is that resolving misunderstanding with a patient in a high stress or emotional environment can be done by this and this and this, and this will be inserting your experience. And this is a lesson learned. And then you would also talk about your future application if you have time. So this would be, okay, here is my takeaway. Here's what I learned. How in the future can I use this knowledge and these lessons to better my career, to better my patient interaction, and to become a better doctor? So this could be maintain two-way communication with the patient so they can make more informed and collaborative decision about their healthcare, right? So, and then the values, it just put down here so you have kind of in mind what ChemMed's role or what UFT four clusters that you hit, communication and empathy. And the last column is the type of questions. So this is really helpful to kind of help your thought process to kind of diverge and kind of spread out a little bit more, because each experience is not only valid within one type of question, it's also applicable to many other questions. So for instance, in this experience, I can talk about describe a failure that I encountered or a conflict because I'm having a misunderstanding with a patient. It could be demonstrating empathy, or it could be describe a time where you're in a stressful situation, or describe a time where you feel like a fish out of water, right? So there's many different prompts you can use and then insert into into the same experience. So in the prep, it's especially important to kind of like radiate your thought process out, to think about as many questions type that is applicable to this question. Well, obviously, depending on the different question stem, your emphasis on what you did and learned should change slightly to fit the prompt. But regardless, this is a good way, especially if you have limited experiences you want to talk about, a good way to kind of flexibly apply the same experience, but maybe tweaking a small details there and there to make it fit a wide range of question. Okay, and then the two other questions you might encounter, the first one is situational scenario questions. So in this one, the biggest tip is to think like Casper. I'm sure if you guys have applied for the cycle, you guys will have written the Casper test. And so think like Casper is like you want to have that kind of sort of framework in yourself, in the sense like, oh, identifying the main issue, how do I gather information, what are my if then statements, what is my solution, what is my overall conclusion. So in situation scenario questions, they're gonna ask you something very similar to what you'll see on Casper. And I find that when you're doing an interview, and especially when you're talking, it's very important to keep your answers realistic and genuine because sometimes on Casper you can give like a really um, correct but unrealistic answer, and they're okay with that. But for interviews, as you're interacting with real people and then you're also talking, I find that you have to come up with a solution a little bit more realistic in the sense that it's right, but it's also realistic, it's achievable. So that makes your answer a lot more genuine, and if and makes the mission community think that you're actually being thoughtful about the answer, like trying to figure out best like a real scenario instead of just answering what they want you to say. And the next type of question is policy question. So policy questions may involve some, policy in healthcare, some of the recent changes, or some of the really debatable, controversial issues that are currently in healthcare. So, you guys, if you wanted to know a little bit more, getting to know a little bit more about the different issues in healthcare currently, I find that searching on Reddit is really helpful because I remember there's posts about like Word documents that people share with each other to cover like the different type of healthcare issues and give you a little bit more of information and Wikipedia on those. So you can search it up on Reddit and try to find these issues and read up on them and to get familiar yourself with them. And I find that a lot of people, when I try to find, good news resources and websites to get to know, to keep up to date with the healthcare, to keep up to date with healthcare, a lot of them are really from the States, like the ABC News or some like journals that are not really tailored to Canada. So I find that just looking at CBC News in their health section is really beneficial for me at least. You don't have to do a lot, right? You just have to keep up to date for a little bit. So one or two articles per day that you think might be interesting or relevant, you can just take a look on them. It wouldn't take you more than 10 minutes a day, and it's just pick something that you feel like you're interested in or you feel like you don't know much about, and then read the article and think about, do you agree with the prompt or do you agree with their arguments and what they're doing, or do you disagree, and take your stance, right? So this is developing your policy question answers, right? So what are some arguments that can support your decision? And if you disagree with the policy, what are some suggestions or improvement that you can make on the policy to make a little bit more acceptable for you? Right, I find that this is actually your general framework for answering the policy type of questions. So if you develop this mindset while you're reading the articles or you're getting to know about these health issues, then you'll be a lot more comfortable with these policy questions as you start practicing them. So some of the common policy issues are such as legalization of marijuana, healthcare worker burnouts and stress. How do we deal with this? The significant spending in healthcare system, how do we minimize the cost but also maintain the quality of care we can provide to patients? Or maid, like physician assistant, dying, and what are some of the limits on who is eligible and who is ineligible, and how do we carry that out? So some of these things can help you get started and think about the different issues in healthcare. Okay, and for the last bit, I want to talk about introducing you to the different interview types for Canadian med school. So the first one is the more traditional type is called panel interview. So by its name suggest, you will be talking to a panel of people. Some of them will be physicians, some of them will be medical students, some of them could be social workers or researchers in the university. So you could be talking to a lot of different diverse group of people who will be interviewing you. So panel is really like a conversation, like a normal job interview, right? You sit there and you talk to them, and it's very personal based. So you want to go with the flow and you want to make it conversational and with less obvious structure. So, compared to MMI and VMPI, which I'll cover later, panel is a lot more interactive and conversational. So you don't want to make your answers too long. You don't want to be there just talking for 10 minutes and they're just gonna listen to you, and that way they're gonna lose interest and they're not gonna be very engaged with you. So you want to make your answers relatively short and concise. And you also want to be looking and anticipating for follow-up questions. So something may be like, so you mentioned that you had this experience with XYZ. Can you tell me a little bit more on how this shaped you as a person, how this helped you in blah 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 blah? And they will ask you something basing on the things you mentioned, and you can talk a little bit more about those. So especially for the first two questions, right? If you really want an experience to be, if you really want to discuss a certain experience, you kind of want to bring it up. Um, you may not need to go into details about this experience, but just briefly introducing it, and then sometimes they will go back to the experience and ask you more follow-up questions about the experience, and which you get a chance to elaborate a bit more on. In terms of the question type you might get from this sort of interview is it will be a mixture of personal questions plus situational question, or it could be predominantly personal or opinion questions based on the school. So some schools may have a MMI or something like a first interview done, and then the second one is a personal interview. Sorry, a panel interview. So that panel interview will be focused a lot more on personal questions as opposed to situational questions because you supposedly already done an MMI, right? Whereas schools that just offer a panel interview directly, then you can anticipate a mixture of personal plus situational questions. And so the really big tip of panel is to really try to engage your audience because what happens for panel is you will be sitting there even though virtually, you will talking to people asynchronously. And a lot of the time for panel interviews, people won't be taking notes because they're engaging in an active conversation with you. So it's really important to making sure that your verbal speed is okay and you're taking occasional pauses for people to think and reflect on what you just said. And also, it's really helpful sometimes to use some conversational phrases like, as you may have known, or as you may also, something like those. So to try to engage your audience. And it's okay, basing on the question you're talking about or the discussion topics you're on, to be a little humorous and making a joke or two one there and there to, soften up the atmosphere. The general idea is that you want to have really engaging and interactive conversation with your interviewers who may sometimes try to intentionally be strict or be serious and be hard for you to get nervous, but you really have to maintain your stance and demonstrate your personality and through this sort of interview. Next is multiple mini interviews. So, as its name suggests, you will have many mini stations that you have to rotate through. And each mini station, there will be a different judge or interviewer waiting for you. So, the exact format in terms of how long it will take, whether you will have follow-up questions or whether it's synchronous, and the number of stations will vary depending on the school. So, in Ontario, for instance, you will have McMaster, who invented MMI, will be using it for their interview. You will also have queens who use MMI for their first round of interview. For example, at McMaster, it's a synchronous interview, so we'll be interacting with the interviewer live, whereas Queens is an asynchronous interview, whereas you will be just recording your answers and through multiple mini stations, and the interviewers will review these videos later on. So a good way to think about MMI and prepare for it is that MMI is very structured, and so it's very different from a panel interview where it's more conversational. So for MMI, you will be first given a few minutes to read the prompt and prepare your answers, and then you will have a set time to deliver your answer response. So when you first start practicing, this may be hard if you're just thinking in your mind how to prepare this answer and how to say it. So I recommend start practicing by jotting down notes and some thought process and how you want to structure the answer. As you become more and more used to the structure and your thought process are within your brain, you can try to eliminate jotting down notes and try to be more independent and just think in your head. Because one of the issues with jotting down notes is that some schools may not allow you to take any notes during the actual interview. So it's really good to eliminate that habit before you start, doing that interview so that you don't get really uncomfortable and not used to it and thinking in your head. But just to start, I think it's really helpful to jotting down notes so you have a better framework and answer quality. And similar to what I mentioned for the situational questions, you want to make your answers full but also realistic. If you are doing a synchronous interview like with McMaster, you want to try to leave 2 to 3 minutes in the end for some interaction with your interviewers and anticipating follow-up questions. So what happened is you will think about your answers, preparing for it, and then you will bam hit the interview, and then the interview will be will switch onto the Zoom, and then you guys will talk. And then you will first present your answers for maybe 5 minutes. And then after your answer is done, the interviewers will have some prepared follow-up questions for you and they will ask you about them. So it's really important to try to leave that 2 to 3 minutes for these interactions and follow-up questions because they allow you the chance to interact with the interviewer and also be more thoughtful and genuine in your answers. So because you have this, when you're practicing for an MMI, you want to make sure your time is within that 5 minutes instead of the total time given for you, just to account for this 2 to 3 minutes of interaction. And finally, is the VMPI, which is called Virtual Modified Personal Interview. This is a specific interview type, specific for U of T, and it's only 4 questions. You have 3 minutes to prepare and 5 minutes to respond. And each of the question is assessed by an independent reviewer. So these questions are personal based and they can focus on the 4 core competencies. So my personal experience with doing the VMPI is that time really goes faster than you think because if you think about there's only 4 questions and you can get it done in half an hour, right? So it goes by really, really fast. And what happened is they're gonna give you a little time for breaks in between the 4 questions. So you can do a question, take your break, and then do another question and take your break. So what I did personally is I just skipped all the breaks and I just kind of zoomed through the interview. And I find that it was a lot more rushed. Like thinking back, I felt that I should have taken the breaks because it was a lot faster than I thought it would be. And I am just kind of like zooming it. I was not really thinking as clearly as I should for some of the answers. I feel like if I took the break, I could have, calmed down a little bit after a question. And then once my mind clears, I can begin the next question fresh and clear. So I think if you guys are doing this VMPI, think about whether taking a break might be helpful for you and do not feel rushed because you have ample of time. So if you feel like you need to rush this, feel free to like calm down and slow down a little bit, take your breaks and do this without feeling really nervous or rushed. And compared to the MMI, this is a lot more personal because U of T in their website literally states that this is a chance for us to get to know about you as a person. So this is gonna be leaning more towards getting to know about your personal experience, your personalities, your characteristics, your thought process, as opposed to hypothetical situation. But situation and policy questions may still come up, so you have to be prepared for them as well. But for VMPI, it's really important to think about how you can incorporate your personal experience into the prompt you discuss because they may ask you about opinions on certain topics, and if you can incorporate your personal experience to support your arguments instead of just generic or things that happen in for on a general sense, it will make your answer a lot more genuine and realistic. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk a little bit about my package. So my hourly rate is 48 USD an hour, and I do interview prep for MMI, that's for McMaster and Queens. MPI is for the U of T. Panel interviews, that's for Queens, Western, and U Ottawa. So usually the session is about an hour. So what will happen is we will start with a mock interview. So this will be you dressing up, getting ready for like as if you're for an actual interview, and I will be depending on the interview type, whether I'll be off screen or I'll be like talking to you like synchronously with questions that I prepared or questions that you'd want me to cover. And then after the mock interview, we will dial down and look at the feedbacks and how to improve your answers and potentially practice a couple more questions if we have time. However, I'm also open to other structures for this an hour session. Namely, if you are having trouble to start interviewing, if you want like a brainstorming session, we can do that, or other session type of your desire. And I do offer, if you want like a 5 hour bundle, like discounts available. So feel free to reach out to me if that's something you're interested in. And just add the barcode of the presentation. You can scan this barcode, and it should lead you directly to my profile at Accepted Together. Okay, I think that concludes my presentation. I do want to leave ample of time for folks if people want to have questions answered, because I do know that interview process is a very personal um, experience, and people may have very different questions or personal questions that are tailored to themselves, and not necessarily that I cover in this presentation. So if you have anything, feel free to type in the chat or like raise your hand if you want to vocalize and let me know.
Hi there.
Hello, Jen.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand, but I don't see the option.
Oh, no
Um,
worries.
Thank you for your presentation. I just had a question regarding, I guess, prep for the interview. I know that like some people say like there's various books you can read. Do you have any suggestions for that?
In terms of like doing things right, that sort of book.
Yeah, like there's that book. Are there any like other things that you would suggest either reading or like looking up to help prep?
That's a good question. So I personally didn't read any books because I find um, the level of complexity that goes into like things like doing things right. It's a lot, and like investing yourself in a book, it's a big commitment, I would say. And I find that interviews, if you think about it, is really to get to know a little bit about you and your thoughts. So I think it's more fruitful if you focus on collecting your personal experiences and how to prepare talking about them in your interview, and also anticipating and building a structure for situational type of questions and policy questions, and being a little bit familiar with these type of questions. I think it's a better way to do, and just practice more questions and be familiar with how to approach different type of question. I think is a little bit more helpful, because at the end of the day, they don't anticipate you to be an ethicist, or they don't anticipate you to be full on knowledge with healthcare and the issues. They just want you to be a little bit familiar with it and have your own thoughts and process, and that you're able to, deliver them. I think it's the most important part. And in terms of policy questions, I find that reading CBC News is just enough for you to talk about stuff. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, for sure. I also just wanted to ask a follow-up question. So the situational based questions that I guess one would get are pretty similar to those on like Casper.
Yeah. I find that the situational questions I got are pretty similar to Casper, except that McMaster, their MMI, have some really weird situational questions. Um, so I think having because you can't, prepare for every single situational question possible, the prompts possible, right? So it's really important to develop a good structure in terms of like, what kind of things you will say and how you say these things, so that you can apply this structure to every single situational questions you might encounter, right? And I think it's also helpful because there's different type of situational question. There is maybe an ethical dilemma, right? Or maybe there is um, something you have to make a difficult decision, or maybe there's something about policy. So I think finding categorizing different situations is really helpful for you to perhaps develop a more personalized or individual approach to different type of questions, so you're more prepared for those. But I would say they're pretty similar to the Casper test. A little bit, maybe a little bit more difficult and convoluted, but they're within the scope of Casper.
But obviously we have like more time to answer than Casper, so it allows for like a more thoughtful answer.
Yeah, I would say actually, the situational questions you will encounter on the actual interview will be a little bit more realistic, like something that you would actually encounter in life, but in like a very extreme case, right? Whereas Casper, sometimes the questions are just kind of bizarre, um, so you do have a lot more time to prepare. I think it's 2 to 3 minutes if I don't remember uh, incorrectly. You also have 8 minutes to answer the question for Casper. And but obviously you want to leave 2 to 3 minutes for follow-up questions. But I find that being able to in terms of follow-up questions, I find that really difficult because it's a little bit different because you have to think on your feet. So when you're practicing, try to think of some follow-up questions you might get asked and how you might answer them preemptively as a good way to practice for the follow-up questions. Or have your friends and family think about some follow-up questions they might ask based on your answer.
Thank you.
No worries. So I have a question from the chat. How long did you spend to prepare for the interview? So, um, I remember getting my McMaster interview in early January, and then it was in March that I did it. U of T, so for instance, it really depends on the school because for U of T, they literally just send out interview invites like 2 weeks before the interview. That's what they do. They don't send you ahead of time, whereas McMaster, they give you like a few months to prepare for it, which is very nice of them. Um, so it really depends on the school. I started UFT interview prep as soon as I got the interview invite, which is like 2 weeks before. I find that a little bit rushed. So probably good if you think that you might get an interview, like from especially McMaster. I think it's easier to kind of anticipate whether you will get an interview invite from them because you can take a look at your GPA, your Casper, and your CAR score, and think about whether you might get one. So I think it's good to you can start, thinking about how to get started. Maybe start with your personal questions, right? Because this takes a longer time because you have to collect all of your ABS experiences, write them in paper, practice speaking about them, and then for all of them, there's gonna be, 10 or 20 experiences you can practice speaking about. So I think you can start slowly building on these personal experiences and then do maybe a couple ethical scenarios, situational questions as you start. Um, but for McMaster, I also started maybe like a month before the interview, but really it depends on the school and how early they are able to inform you that you got an interview invite. And I would say start as early as you can. Maybe just familiarize yourself with the healthcare issues by just reading the news. Every day is not a huge task, or just do like a practice one personal question every single day, and then really do like an extensive prep once you got your interview and start like it's closer to interview date. I hope it helps. Okay, is there a question bank you recommend with sample questions for UFT? This is a good question. I actually struggle a little bit finding appropriate sample questions for UFT because they're kind of unique in their own way. But I find that just having that generic approach with having personal question ready, getting to know a little bit about the healthcare system and the current issues, and knowing some couple solutions and improvement on them. And then also be prepared for some situational questions by preparing your structures. It's a good way to approach UFT questions because their questions are pretty covered within the scope that I discussed for today. You can literally just search up VMPI UFT interview questions, and there are gonna be a couple educational sites where you can get these questions from as practice. But I don't find like a particular site that really impresses me. It just a lot of the questions you can just find online and practice. But I think it's more important instead of just practicing questions without really having a goal, it's really too important to develop your structures, develop your personal experience, and develop the way you deliver your answers as opposed to just practice mindlessly. Because you can't practice and touch on every single questions. So how can a UFT policy question turn personal? That's a good question. Um, so policy questions can be something like for instance that, COVID, for instance, just giving you like a hypothetical situation, like COVID has turned a lot of things virtual, and this has many different impacts on our lives. Do you agree that, getting it virtual is a really good way to go, or do you disagree? Right? So you can talk about generically like saying, oh, increasing people's efficiency, however, it isolates people and, really have an impact on people's mental health. Um, you can talk about like very generically and on a broader scope, but you can also dive into your personal experiences saying like, oh, for instance, I use virtual this and this, and how did I achieve and what did I learn? How does it connect to the prompt? Whether it has good impacts or bad impacts, whether you agree or disagree with the prompt. So trying to do this, something like this. Obviously, a lot of the UFT questions has a personal connection to it, so you can try to find that personal link and try to insert yourself in it. Unless you encounter a situational question where you probably don't want to put yourself in the shoes of the person, you just want to talk hypothetically in that situation, as opposed to inserting your personal experience in it. I hope that makes sense. If not, just let me know. Have you guys applied the cycle? Or are you just toning in to get ready for it? Cool. Nice, nice. Okay. Well, best of luck to you guys. I hope you guys get some exciting news in the next year, early next year. Very exciting. And then the people who are applying next cycle, this is just kind of like a anticipation of what you're going to go through. It's a very stressful and roller coaster process. Um, Looking back, I think there's a lot of things you can learn from this experience about yourself and like your intention of becoming a physician. So even if you weren't as successful as you hope this year, you will still gain a lot of valuable lessons about yourself and how you want to approach the next cycle. So best of luck to you guys. Okay, if there's no other questions, I guess we can end the seminar as of here. You guys are welcome to reach out to me on Accept Together if you just have like a quick questions that you want to answer. I can definitely provide a little bit more information and details on that. Just let me quickly attach my link here. Oh, someone raised their hand. Go ahead.
Hi. Do you also do MCAT prep?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. What kind of prep are you looking for?
Just like a general firsthand, because I'm gonna be studying this summer.
Mhm.
So I just wanted like to know if you had like just like a general thing, and then in the middle of my studying, maybe I could go and ask you some questions and you could like help me guide me a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you have like specific topics that you want to cover, I think we can definitely talk about it. And then if you have any questions, just let me know. I attached my link in the chat, so just let me know if it doesn't work. Exciting. MCAT is a huge beast. Okay, perfect. Is there anyone who have some final thoughts and questions? Okay, I guess we can wrap up here. Thank you guys for attending the seminar. I hope it's helpful with the information I present today. And again, if there's any questions, you can always reach out to me on the Step Together and I can help you answer, hopefully. And thank you guys. Have a good night and good luck with the people who are doing the application this cycle.
Thank you so much.
No
It was a
problem.
very, very useful presentation.
I hope it helped.